Good afternoon. I just told Tzipi Livni that if we could get you all to be Zionist Union voters, we could make her Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's a real pleasure, both professionally and personally, to welcome the Honorable Tzipi Livni to Princeton. When I served as the United States Ambassador to Israel, I had interactions with Ms. Livni in three different guises. She was the Minister at that time of Immigrant Absorption, the Minister of Housing, and the Minister of Justice, not all at the same time. But as I mentioned last night at a dinner we had mostly with faculty, she was the hardest working minister in the Israeli cabinet during these years, and it was a pleasure to work with her. She is the most powerful female political leader in Israel today, and for many years, the head of the Hatnuah party and a co-leader of the Zionist Union, which is the opposition party in Israel today. She's a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee and head of the Subcommittee on International Legal Warfare. During her political career, she has served in 8 different cabinet positions, the most held by any Israeli woman. From 2001 to 2009, she served in the cabinets of Ariel Sharon and Ehud Olmert as Israel's foreign minister and in other positions. And she also led successive rounds of negotiations with the Palestinians. She has served as acting prime minister, as I mentioned, Minister of Justice, head of the Israeli team in the negotiations in 2008-2013, member of the National Security Cabinet. This goes on, by the way, some time, and a senior security cabinet during the Second Lebanon War, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Protective Edge. She's also been a lieutenant in the Israeli Defense Forces, later served in Mossad, and she told us last night that she thought her career would be as a basketball player. So she has had a very busy day here meeting with our students and in our classes, and we're really grateful that she was able to spend time with us today. Please join me in welcoming Tzipi Livni.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank also Ambassador Kurtzer, not only for the invitation, but for the times in which we worked together. And you knew how to identify not only the American interest in Israel, but also the Israeli interest and how to work together and to promote the common interest of both countries. And I mean, we are facing sometimes difficult days, and the role of the ambassador, the American ambassador in Israel, is the most important role, I believe. And thank you for that, for those times. And thank you for the invitation here. And you said that I'm a hard worker as a minister, so today I really worked hard, and I met lots of students, been in different classes, and shared ideas, and also learned something from these meetings. The idea is to discuss today the challenges of the free world, and basically I believe that we should discuss the common challenges of the free world, the Middle East, and Israel. And Israel is exposed to all these challenges because Israel is part of the free world. By definition, Israel is a democracy. We live in the tough neighborhood called the Middle East, and the Middle East is becoming more and more tougher and difficult place to be. And the situation of Israel in this tough neighborhood is difficult in compared to others because Israel is the only Jewish state in this region surrounded by Muslim world with an open conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. But before I speak about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I would like to start from speaking about the common challenges that we face. And in order to understand what are the common challenges, we need to, to see the region and maybe even the world from a bird-eye point of view. And when we look at the region, we see that what began as an Arab Spring and gave hope for new democracies to emerge, turned into some places into an Islamic winter. We see now all these different kinds of terrorist organizations that expresses extreme religious ideology. Well, I believe that this kind of hatred is not connected to any religion, but yet what they express is something that what they say is expressing their religious ideology. And I believe that what was not clear enough, maybe unfortunately on September 11, is clear now, is more clear now, is clear now. We see that when it comes to this terrorist organization, borders don't stop them. There is no boundaries to their cruelty. And in a way, we are facing, as part of this world, cruelty that used to have in this world thousands of years ago, but now they are using new technology in order to spread this hatred and this fear. Now, this affects our life in a way, in three different ways. One, of course, is terror itself. We have casualties, this is what we see, and this is horrific enough. The other way is when, especially in Europe now, we see the refugees that are leaving these places coming to Europe, and I believe that Europe understands now more than ever that what's happening in the Middle East is not far away. It's not even the backyard of Europe, it's now Europe itself, and they need to address her. And this brings me to the third way that these terrorists are affecting our lives, is that when we need to deal with this kind of terror, and with the refugees coming to Europe, they are affecting, unfortunately, also our values. Because the reaction to this fear, to this hatred, is also hatred coming from the other side. And we see in different parts of the world more xenophobia. We see new parties that are emerging and getting more and more support and power because of hatred and because this is becoming their own platform. So we see that what the terrorists are doing is not only terror, not only fear, but what we see is new parties, political parties, on the expense of our values in the free world. Now, in order to meet these challenges, the free world need to understand what are we facing, and we need to say and understand that this is a religious war. Now, I would not use what was said here by one of the candidates. It's not the entire Muslim world against the other. No, it's not. It's another kind of a religious war, and it's part of the Muslim world. These extreme religious groups, terrorists that are using this terror against all the others, including Muslims, including Jews, including Christians. For them, all of us are infidel and therefore worth killing. And I insist on saying that this is a religious war because we need to understand that there is nothing we can do in order to stop this war by approaching them, understanding, reaching an agreement with. No, it's not about what we do, it's about who we are, it's about our values. And we need to stand up for our values, we need to defend our values. And in order to do it, we need also to understand that using force is inevitable. We need to do it when it comes to this kind of terror, because otherwise, as I said before, it's not just the casualties from terror, but they affect our own society, and this needs to be stopped. Now, this brings me to Israel, and in a way, I'm sorry to say, but Israel is in a way the common denominator for all these terrorists, because when we look at the region, you have Sunni extremists or Sunni terrorist organizations, whether it's ISIS, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and you have the Shia, and this is Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example. When it comes to Israel, for both sides of the Muslim world, Israel represents it's a state of infidel, because Israel is a Jewish state, and therefore they all love to hate us. So, but since they are threatening also the other part of the Arab world and the Muslim world, Israel can be and should be part of the new camp that is being emerged now in the region of what we call so-called moderates or pragmatic state, that they understand that the threat that they are facing comes from extremism within the Muslim world. They understand that their enemy is, whether it's Iran or Daesh or Hezbollah, and they are now starting to work together, meeting these challenges, and Israel can and should be part of this camp. But unfortunately, Israel has a glass ceiling in our relations with the Arab world, and this is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, it is true that most of the Arab leadership understand that Israel is not the enemy anymore. What they see as their enemies, mostly it's Iran, Daesh. But yet, and it is also clear that Israel is not the reason for extremism in the region. I mean, if we would solve, hopefully, the conflict between us and the Palestinians, Iran would not change its ideology. Daesh, ISIS would not stop cutting heads off in the region. But when it comes to the Arab street, Israel is still the enemy. And therefore, even when it comes to the leaders, those understanding that Israel is not the enemy, those who want to work with Israel in meeting these challenges, these regional challenges, they cannot do it publicly. Some of them are not willing to do it at all because they cannot afford doing something public with Israel because of the public opinion there. And therefore, even though we have the same interest in the region, we cannot do what we need for Israel and to share and to work with this part of the world. It is also clear that if we make moves toward solving the conflict with the Palestinians, or hopefully we would solve the conflict with the Palestinians, this is the day in which most of these states would normalize their relations with Israel. In accordance to the Arab Peace Initiative that was put on the table in 2002, was never implemented, but yet it's still, for now, on the table. I know that it's more difficult now. We don't know when we say the Arab League or the Arab world, who's against whom, but basically, this can be an opportunity for Israel to have better relations and even normalization with some parts of the Arab world. So this is another reason why to make peace with the Palestinians is an Israeli interest, because it can change the strategic position of Israel in the region. But I said that this can be another reason. This is not the main reason. And when it comes to Israel, most of my friends, and especially Israeli politicians, when they look outside of Israel and they see these trends, they say, okay, see all these enemies around us, see what is the nature of the region, let's do nothing and stick together and be united against those that are against us, against our enemy. And what I say is, okay, it's a tough neighborhood, I'm not naive, but let's see whether there are some opportunities here for Israel, and let's be united for something, not just against our enemies, but for a vision, for a common vision, firstly, to Israelis themselves. And I believe that the common vision, the vision for the state of Israel, and it's now about us, it's not about the Arab world. I believe that the only way to keep the values of the state of Israel as a Jewish democratic state, as the nation state of the Jewish people, when all our citizens, the Israeli citizens, are equal rights citizens, the only way to do it is by achieving peace with the Palestinians, ending the conflict based on the idea of two states for two peoples. And therefore, this is the main interest of Israel. And trust me, it's not a favor to the Palestinians. It's not a favor to the Arab world. It's not even a favor to the President of the United States. It's something that we need to do for ourselves. And frankly, this is the reason for me to be in politics. I joined Israel politics in 1995 after Oslo Agreement, when the Israeli society was divided between two different camps. We still have basically the same camps today. One was the camp of, they call themselves the camp of the land of Israel. They were speaking about the historical rights of the Jewish people on the entire land, and I do believe in the rights of the Jewish people on the entire land. But yet my understanding of our values is that in order to keep Israel as a Jewish democratic state, in order to keep Israel with the Jewish majority, we need to divide the land. So my vision is about having Israel as a Jewish democratic state in the ancient land of Israel, but not on the entire land. But then, frankly, I looked at the other side, my left wing, other friends of mine, left wing, well, I live in Tel Aviv, and they were waiting for the new Middle East to fall on our shoulders. I mean, Oslo Agreement, Shimon Peres said that we live in a new Middle East. And I was a lawyer then by profession, never thought about entering politics. And I said, but listen, Oslo Agreement is a kind of an MOU. It's a more of memorandum of understanding, postponing all the core issues to the end. And I wouldn't have given a client of mine as a lawyer to sell his second-hand apartment and give the keys without getting the full consideration, the full amount of money. So I said, okay, I want to join politics, to enter politics. I was driven by the idea that we need to negotiate, that Israel, as a democracy, need to accept Oslo Agreement because it was signed by a legitimate elected government in Israel. But yet what I said is, okay, let's negotiate in order to finalize this and to have put a package with an answer to all the core issues, quite a detailed answer to all the core issues. So each leader can come to his own people saying, okay, it was difficult. We gave something, we got something, but in the end, this is the package. And for Israel, it keeps our values and the nature of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. And hopefully the Palestinians can say to their own people that what was created is a Palestinian state with some compromises. And there is no agreement without compromises. And we need to understand that any agreement should be win-win. Nobody is going to win on the expense of the other. The idea is win-win, representing the interest of both sides. Now, the problem is that in Israel, when this is the situation around, people are saying to me, okay, you are right, we support the two states for two peoples. By the way, vast majority in Israel supporting the idea of two states for two peoples, but they say, look around, we cannot make a move, it's too dangerous, too risky. And my answer to them is, we cannot wait, because time works against those believing in two states for two peoples. We see in Israel and on the Palestinian side more and more that say, okay, let's do nothing. On the Palestinian side, I hear more and more voices speaking about one-state solution. And basically, to those saying, let's manage the conflict, my answer is that the conflict manages us, that it infiltrates into Israel. That what we see in Israel in the last few years, it's not only a conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, but it's becoming also between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. So we need to take the initiative and not to wait. And more than that, there is no a real stalemate. As long as this is an open conflict, it also broadened the gap between Israel and the international community and the world, or maybe in different ways. It's broadened the gap between what Israel is by its nature and the way Israel is being seen and the image of Israel. Because, as I said, from the bird-eye point of view, as Israelis, when we look at the region, we feel that we are the Davids of the region. It's really a tiny, small state, surrounded by all these. So we are the Davids. But when the world is looking at Israel, it's becoming from, from a bird eye, from a satellite point of view, Google Earth point of view. And what they see is the Israeli soldier that can be my son with the Palestinian child. The Israeli tank or aircraft with, Palestinians throwing stones. And the problem is that those that are exploiting it and abusing it is the Bds movement. Now, when I'm speaking about this movement as a movement, when we Google BDS, they are not in favor of two states for two people. They are not representing the Palestinian cause or the legitimate demand of Palestinians for a state of their own. Basically, they don't support the idea of two states for two peoples. They would not accept the state of Israel or the existence of the state of Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people. I mean, those suggesting that millions and millions of refugees would come, and I'm talking about 4 generations of refugees that are being kept as political cards, that they would come to Israel. The idea is not to solve the conflict, but to have a continuous conflict, and basically this would affect, and Israel cannot exist. But what they do is that they exploit a legitimate criticism, and there can be legitimate criticism on any Israeli government policy. It's okay. Not every criticism is anti-Semitic or based on anti-Semitism. But what they do is that they take those who are criticizing Israel for any government policy, especially on settlements activity. And these sometimes young people in the campus, they say, okay, if we criticize Israel, let's join the BDS. And they don't understand that by joining BDS, they don't support what they believe in, 2 states for 2 peoples, but they support a movement that would not accept the right of Israel to exist. So this is another, not the main reason, but another reason why we should understand that time doesn't serve our cause, our interest. And more than that, there is no real stalemate or stagnation. There is no vacuum. And things deteriorate. It's not like we can manage the conflict and do nothing. And when things are changing or when the things deteriorates, we have more and more terror. And just today, Israel faced in Jerusalem a terror attack. We have more than 20 people injured, some of them in a critical position. So we still don't know who would take responsibility on this terror attack, and Israel would respond. And I truly believe that we are not facing now escalation in terror after all these 3 or 4 months of terror attacks that we had, and now we have this explosion in a bus. But it's very important to say that even for those criticizing Israeli government policy, they need to say and to understand that terror is terror is terror, and there is no just cause for terrorism. And this is very important for us to hear, because otherwise I'm facing some of the Israelis saying, the world is against us anyway. When we face terror, anyway they criticize Israel. And it's very important to make this distinction between criticizing policies, settlements, it's okay. But when it comes to our right to defend itself, to defend ourselves from terror, when it comes to civilians that are being killed or injured in a bus like today, it's important for us to know that when it comes to the right of Israel to defend itself, the world is standing with Israel fighting terror. And since this terror attack was in Jerusalem, another thing which is very important to take care of, and this is to prevent the conflict to turn from a national conflict, which is solvable, into a religious conflict. And we were almost there. I mean, at the beginning of this wave of terror, the focus, it was concentrated in Temple Mount, what they call Haram al-Sharif. And it's the most explosive place in the world. And it's very important that after this, Kerry came to the region, had a meeting with King Abdallah, spoke with Netanyahu, and they made some decisions that eased the tension and changed the trend from a religious side of the conflict to something else that, I mean, it's terror is terror, but yet we need to prevent the conflict to turn into religious conflict because it's unsolvable, as I spoke before about religious conflict, and because I don't want Daesh, ISIS, to use this in a way to make more explosives in our region. So my vision for the state of Israel, this is what I put in my political GPS, I would say. And this is secure Jewish democratic state based, and therefore 2 states for 2 peoples represent my interest. An agreed solution is the preferred solution. And there's a need to understand that not everything is a zero-sum game. And when somebody supports the idea of 2 states, 2 peoples, and when this somebody is the president of the United States, it doesn't turn him into being anti-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. If we understand that 2 states for 2 peoples represent our interest, so let's find out what is the common denominator, how can we move forward? As I said, not everything is zero-sum game. As long as it represents, I would say, just and fair solution based on parameters that represent the interest, the mutual interest, I believe, of Israel, the Palestinians, and also the United States. Some of the things I would not share everything into details, but the basics is that 2 states for 2 peoples means that each state gives an answer to national aspiration of different peoples. This is the only way to end the conflict. This is the reason for me to support this. So the meaning is, and it was mentioned before by Ambassador Kurtzer that I was also Minister of Immigrant Absorption. So the idea is that as Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and took off the international table what was called then the Jewish problem and absorbed and integrated Jews who came from all over the world to Israel, those who needed to leave Europe after the Holocaust, those who needed to leave Arab states after the state of Israel was created, those who left former Soviet Union, those who come from Ethiopia. And Israel is also the home of every Jew who can be a citizen in any other state, but yet Israel is her or his or her home as well. So the creation of the Palestinian state in order to end the conflict is the answer for the entire Palestinian people. Those who live in the territories, in the West Bank or Gaza, and those who live in refugee camps with keys on their necks, waiting these keys, 4 generations now, to open doors in Jaffa or in Haifa, it would not happen. Because the whole idea is not just 2 states. No. The whole idea is based on the legitimate aspiration of the Jewish people for a state and self-determination, and the legitimate demand of the Palestinians for a state of their own. But it cannot be, facing this demand of the Palestinians saying, okay, creating a Palestinian state, yes, but the other state would not be the nation state of the Jewish people. And therefore, this is the answer for the refugees as well. And this is the answer also for the Israeli citizens who are Palestinians. 20% of Israel are minorities. They are equal rights Israeli citizens. Not because Israel is democracy. It's not a favor that equal rights for minority is not a favor that the Jewish state is doing to the democratic state. It's part of our Jewish values. It's not a favor to them as well. It's part of who we are. But from the national perspective, the Palestinian state is an answer for them as well. So this is a common interest for Israel and the US, to end the conflict. Otherwise, we would have another state with an ongoing problem of refugees that is not solved. The other is Israel's security. Israel's security is also an American interest. It's not a favor to Israel. I mean, nobody really wants another terror state or a failed state in the region. The Palestinians, they don't want Hamas to take over. We have enough of those states in the region, and we see the situation in Gaza. I mean, Abu Mazen doesn't like the situation in Gaza as we don't like it. So the whole idea of taking care of Israel's security, and we agreed in the negotiations that the future Palestinian state would be demilitarized state, is part of an understanding that this serves the interest of both peoples, and it is also an American interest. So I just gave you examples of the way to negotiate. I believe in bilateral negotiations, direct negotiations, but the role of the US is crucial. Not as mediator in this sense, because I believe the need to meet the other side, to speak with the other side, to look in the eye, to understand the problems, and to try and solve it during the negotiations. But frankly, without Kerry being so enthusiastic about relaunching negotiations, we wouldn't have had the last round of negotiations. And secondly, because both sides need the relations with the US, and in the end, always there's a need for a US role to bridge gaps and to help both sides to make decisions. Now, I said that this is the GPS, nice, but by going on this road, sometimes there are traffic jams. And now we have problems. I mean, Abu Mazen didn't give an answer to the American proposal in 2014. Unfortunately, he didn't make the decision that was needed. But since I believe that we need to focus on our interests, we need to move forward and try to relaunch negotiations again. But if there is no possibility to do so, we need at first to find out whether there is a possibility. And I believe that there are certain steps that we can do in order to regain trust and hopefully to relaunch negotiations. And anyway, it's on the road toward agreed solution, or it doesn't affect the possibility to achieve an agreement in the future, because the blame game doesn't help. So let's do what we need to do in order to change realities on the ground. You know, in 2014, after the meeting after the collapse of the negotiations, I insisted in meeting Abu Mazen. It was used by Netanyahu a few months later to fire me from his government. But I decided to have this meeting in order to understand what happened. Not just to hear from the Americans what happened. And his answer was, I don't trust him. I mean, he doesn't trust Netanyahu. I said, okay, Netanyahu doesn't trust you. It's not a matter of whether you trust him, it's a matter of what was on the table. And if the US put something on the table, which is fair and just, and represent all the core issues, and the basis is 67, and this was in the US paper, and this can be the basis for negotiation, it's missing an opportunity. The choice for leaders, it's not between all or nothing. And sometimes if you don't get all and you say, no, you got nothing. And therefore, I believe that firstly, we can build trust. But in order to build trust, Israel is the one who needs to make some decisions and to change realities on the ground. I mean, I was speaking about Israel's security. This is something that we would continue in defending our citizens. But frankly, building new settlements or continuing settlements activities, this belongs to another vision. It's not part of two-state solution vision. It's part of an old vision that was mine. And this is Greater Israel. And this is to keep the entire land. And Menachem Begin, and I grew up in a house of, my father was a member of parliament in Likud. I mean, for him, Menachem Begin was really the mentor. They were thinking about giving equal rights to all those living between Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea. The whole idea was not to control the Palestinians. The whole idea was to live happily ever after. But we can't. So the choice, and this is the Israeli choice, is to continue to move forward in accordance to the idea of two states for two peoples. There is a small group in Israel. They still support the idea of Greater Israel. I believe that this is on the expense of the Jewish state or the Jewish democratic state. But this is a minority in Israel. And when we continue in building more or in settlements activities, it doesn't serve our security. It broadens the gap between Israel and the world. It makes also some problems in the relations between Israel and the US. And what's the use of it? It really doesn't serve our interest. And imagine that if we would freeze, this can really mean that Israel means business. That when we say two states for two peoples, we mean it. And also investing or helping to invest in the Palestinian economy. Good Palestinian economy is better for our security. Or give them the possibility in places that are going to be part of the Palestinian state. I'm not talking about the exact definition or the delineation of the border. It serves our interest. And what I tell you now is basically what the security service and IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is putting or saying to the cabinet to make decisions. This can change the reality. I mean, as I said before, it's a tough neighborhood. I'm not thinking or talking about peace in a romantic manner. It's not a fairy tale, but I believe that there are certain things that we can do in order to change our reality. With a partner, without a partner, no matter what's happening on the other side, we should be focused on our vision. Now, it is true, and I would end this by saying that in the end, there's a need for decisions by leaders. But sometimes the leaders are also politicians. And to make these steps or to sign peace treaty, and the meaning is compromises, and this affects the narratives of your own people, and it is very sensitive and emotional, and there's a political price to it. But I believe that those who really think about the future need to understand that the price of not having an agreement for your people is higher than the price of having an agreement. But the problem is that when you speak about politicians, they are thinking about the political price, which is here and now. While the benefit from an agreement is something that would not happen the next day. It's something for generations to come. And therefore, we are facing, unfortunately, those that would speak about it but would not make the decisions or would hesitate before making decisions. Now, I joined politics, I told you that I joined politics in 1995. My children were 5 and 8. Now they're 29, 26. And I told you I was a lawyer. I'm a better lawyer than a politician. But, you know, I looked at them and I said, okay, what do I leave them? I mean, bank account as a lawyer is nice, but it's not enough. And I decided to join politics and to be involved in the negotiations. I negotiated twice. We didn't reach an agreement, so I didn't accomplish the mission. But as I said before, I came from a family that they were really a great believer of Greater Israel. Both of them were members of the Irgun before the State of Israel was established. They met while robbing a British money train, not for their pockets, but in order to buy a weapon for the Irgun. They were the first couple who got married in the new State of Israel, the day the State of Israel was established. I know that they are the first couple because according to the Jewish religion, you cannot get married between Passover and for a few weeks later. But my grandmother convinced the Rabbi of Tel Aviv to make this ceremony. I don't know how, but this is what happened. By the way, it's the grandmother from my father's side. She didn't want my father to live in sin, I mean. But anyway, for them, they were a great believer in Greater Israel. And according to their request, both of them are not alive, and according to their request, the map of Greater Israel, which was the symbol of the Irgun, is tattooed on their grave. When I joined politics, my father was not alive, my mother was alive, and since I know what is her ideology, I tried, I hope that she doesn't listen to the radio, she doesn't see television when I'm giving interviews. Because I was speaking about 2 states, and then one day after one of the interviews, it was on television, I still remember the day and the time in which I got a phone call, and it was after an interview that I mentioned the 2 words, Palestinian state. And she said to me, listen, Tzipi, I hear you. It hurts me. But you know what? We didn't fight to establish this state just for the old guys. I see young people leaving Israel. They are leaving for America. We fought for you. Make your own decision for your children. So this is what I'm trying to do today. Thank you.
As is our custom, we'll take some questions. Students first, if they could line up at the 2 mics. And we do have a little bit of a time constraint today, so I would ask that you please ask questions and save your speeches for another day.
I can take some questions together if
Okay.
this makes it easier.
Why don't we do this? We'll take 2 questions at a time, and then the second 2, okay?
Okay.
Please.
Hi, thank you very much for coming to speak today. There was an article that came out in the New Republic in 2014 that purported to tell the background story of the Kerry Peace Initiative negotiations, and 2 of the factors highlighted in that article talked about confusion between Kerry and Netanyahu over which prisoners were going to be released, and 2, disagreements between yourself and your Palestinian counterpart over what the settlement freeze was being traded in exchange for. My question is, do you think the Kerry Initiative had a chance of succeeding, and if so, why do you think it failed?
All right, Mr. Livni, thanks a lot for...
One moment, I'm writing the question for you. Okay. Okay. Yes.
All right, Minister, thanks a lot for your talk. So one country that's sort of been like pushing a lot into the Middle East lately is China. And so they've had sort of really strong trading relationships with all the main actors. But just this year, for example, the Chinese president went on a visit to Israel and called for the creation of a Palestinian state. So maybe like when and in what circumstances do you see China playing a more active role in what happens around Israel?
Okay. Thank you. Basically, I think that the questions are connected because I don't see any new players entering into this conflict and trying to solve it by mediating instead of the United States. I believe that the role of the United States is crucial. It's very important for Israel. When in Israel you say the international community, basically we refer to the US. And it is true that the relations with China, with India are becoming better. It is based on economic interest, but it's not changing. The involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is basically based on the US. It is also, since 2002, I believe, there is the Quartet. And the Quartet is the US, Russia, EU, and United Nations, that they are involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they make decisions on, or suggestions or reports. We are all waiting for their next report on the situation on the ground. So altogether, these are the players. Now, and this takes me back to Kerry. As I said before, without Kerry, we wouldn't have had the last negotiations round. I joined the government because, and this was my condition, to join Netanyahu government in order to negotiate. But when this started, Abu Mazen said that he has his own conditions because he doesn't trust Netanyahu and everything. So we needed to choose between different options. And Kerry was here, excuse me for saying it, but I know that it was a kind of a joke, going back to the Middle East, trying to convince Netanyahu nothing would happen. I'm talking about the days before we started the negotiations. And he insisted on it. And I remember the last day he was in Ramallah and then in Jordan. And I spoke with him on the phone, and really he was up to here, I think, from all of us. And I said to him, listen, you need to have maybe the last call before you leave to Netanyahu and put on the table the options. And we need to choose. And the options were to start negotiations on the basis of 67, to release prisoners that were imprisoned and made their horrific crimes, by the way, before Oslo Agreement, a group that is very important for Abu Mazen, or to free settlements activities. The choice of the government, not mine, but basically this was the choice, was not to free settlements activities, but to release the prisoners. And I believe that this was a mistake. And it was a lose-lose. Why lose-lose? Because for Israelis to release prisoners, this kind of prisoners, I mean, we are talking about terrorists that made really horrific acts, some of them like what we see now with Daesh, really unbearable. Now, it is true that they were in Israeli prison for more than 20 years, almost 30 years, but yet they are terrorists, and we have the families of the victims living in Israel. But this was the decision. So when we released prisoners, this caused an effect against us or against Netanyahu in Israel. So in order to compensate that, Netanyahu built in settlements, according to the understanding with the US, not with the Palestinians. But when the Palestinians saw us building in settlements activities, they say, okay, we don't trust them. So it was a kind of a lose-lose. And I believe that it was the choice, but it was a mistake. This is one thing. Secondly, I believe in direct negotiations. And mostly we invested most of the time in negotiating with the US. And they negotiated with the Palestinians. And we had also meetings between us and the Palestinians, but in the end, we invested hundreds of hours in negotiating with the US on this paper. The decision was to reach not an agreement, but a framework for negotiations that the parties would negotiate in accordance to this. But this was the request of Netanyahu. He can say that he has reservations, and he would raise it during the negotiations. The kind of deniability, you know, it's not me, it's the US, I don't know. Anyway, so I believe that what we missed is really sitting down with the Palestinians and understanding where they stand. And finally, in the end, there was a huge, I don't know whether it was misunderstanding, but I don't want to enter into details, but when we started the negotiations, we had our own terms about the prisoners. For example, we said that we would not release Israeli prisoners. We would release Palestinian prisoners, not Israeli citizens. But it was not understood by the Palestinians, so I don't know whether it was clear to them, and we reached the final tranche, and it became impossible. And before the final tranche, on March 17, 2014, Abu Mazen met Obama, and he didn't give an answer to the framework. So it was the deterioration, this meeting. He didn't give an answer. Then we need to release prisoners, but we never accepted to release this kind of prisoners. So, and he was waiting, and after 3 days, he decided to sign conventions and violating what was the agreement at the beginning of the negotiations. And then we had the agreement between him and Hamas, so I mean 3 strikes, and it was really the end of the negotiations. But I would like to express my high appreciations to what Kerry did. I mean, he invested in it, he believed in it. He sat hours and hours with us, with the Palestinians. But I think that the last mistake was that the US didn't put the paper on the table publicly. Because I want the Israelis to understand what Netanyahu accepted, and I want the Palestinians to understand what Abu Mazen didn't expect, and I want the world to know where we are, and not restart when we relaunch negotiation to start from the beginning.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
You can sit for a minute.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, so we're going to take 3 questions, and I'm going to also ask a question.
Okay.
Because your answer to this previous question raises a larger issue in negotiations, and you've been so experienced. Why does a misunderstanding exist between, in this case, maybe Mr. Kerry and Mr. Netanyahu, on a question that has a very specific answer? Either Israel agreed to release, in this case, 104 prisoners, or it agreed to release 80 prisoners. How does a misunderstanding exist in a negotiation at this level? So, and maybe you can think about it in more broader terms from your experience, okay? That's my
I have a
question.
specific answer to this.
Okay. All right, so let's do, we have 4 questions. I promised 3. Let's do 3. So here.
Thank you very much for coming here today. During your speech, you used the expression Jewish democratic state and nation state of the Jews a lot. And I was wondering about the particulars of that phrase and what it meant. For example, if a non-Jew were to move to France, and he would become a Frenchman. Or if he moved to Germany, he'd become a German. But if he moved to Israel, you'd become an Israeli, but not a Jew. And so I was wondering what the term Jewish democratic state meant for you, and what it means for non-Jews living in the state of Israel.
Sure. Thank you again for speaking with us. My question is a bit different, I think, from the trend. As the U.S. is potentially on the verge of having our first woman president, and as probably one of the among the most powerful women in the world in politics, I was wondering if you could speak some to your experiences of how your gender has played a role in your political experiences thus far.
We'll take 2 more. We'll get you as well.
It's a long answer to all this.
Thank you
Oh,
again
really?
for coming and speaking here. So I was wondering if you became prime minister and negotiations were to unfortunately fall through, would you institute a permanent freeze on settlements as a gesture of goodwill, or would you entertain, for example, something that one of your colleagues, MK Yair Lapid, has called phased unilateral disengagement? Would you engage in either of those steps, or would you continue settlement growth and continue the status quo?
Okay. Last question. When Ms. Livni finishes her responses, which will probably be Thursday to these questions, I would ask you, after you thank her by applauding, please remain in your seats, and we will escort Ms. Livni out, and the program will end at that point. Last question.
So thank you so much for being here. You mentioned that Israel has a majority of people who believe in a 2-state solution, but unfortunately the government doesn't really represent that. So what do you think would have to happen for there to be a government to kind of represent the will of the people in the sense of there being a 2-state solution, or will for that? If that makes sense.
What is the question?
How do you think the left in Israel, I guess, or the center left can mobilize to
Okay.
Take over the government, I guess?
Okay. Okay, I'll start by answering your question. It's not in a broader manner. It was a specific item in the negotiations. And it was not a gap in numbers. I mean, unfortunately, in our hands, we have more prisoners. So the question was not the number of prisoners that would be released. And when it comes to prisoners that are in Israeli prisoner, excuse me, it was part of the question because they want to release just prisoners, terrorists that kill Jews for national reason. Now, trust me, when somebody killed, and this was one of the cases who killed an old Jewish woman at home, whether it was a robbery or from national perspective, trust me, nobody knows. So we have numbers of prisoners. It was the last day, as I said to you, really, and it was clear that for us, we are talking about Palestine. It was not misunderstandings. But I think that Palestinians didn't understand that this is or maybe didn't know that this is our position. And we postponed it to the last tranche, hoping for good. And then there was another solution to this. And the other solution was that Israel would be willing to do it, and we said it since day one, if we get Pollard back. And therefore, the last few days were between Israel and the US, waiting for an American decision to release Pollard, and the Palestinians knew it. They knew that this is what we are waiting for. But Abu Mazen, looked at the watch and said, okay, I need these prisoners at midnight today. And he was told, I think, that we are working on it. And then, this is a day that I would never, never, never forget in my life. It was the last day, and we were working on draft resolution for an Israeli government decision to release Pollard. There were some American demands on this, and to continue the negotiations on the basis of what we agreed, and to release the 4 tranches of prisoners. And Netanyahu was occupied with meetings with some of his political partners, what he called natural partners, some of them settlers, explaining to them what's happening. And I was there, and I said, we need to convene, to send a message to the government that we have a meeting. And he was speaking with his partners, and I was outside in the Prime Minister's office. You know how the office looks like. And then I saw in one of the rooms television, and I saw Abu Mazen. And I saw him signing the conventions. And the conventions mean that he's violating what was agreed, because the agreement was that the Palestinians would not take unilateral steps and would not join international convention. And this was the day in which basically it collapsed. We tried to revive it and to continue, but this was the moment in which, so it's not a matter of blaming. This is the way it happened. Now, you asked me about whether to free settlements or to give the Palestinians if they are not okay. And now the Israeli Prime Minister, what he says in Hebrew, it's itnu yakablu. If they give, they would get. This is not the way I see things. From my perspective, is what am I getting for my decisions? And freezing settlement helps me. It can help the Palestinians as well, but it's my interest. So why to wait until they would give me something? All this, negotiating on small stuff, it's less important. Let's negotiate on the most sensitive and important issues. We need to have priorities as leaders. To be generous on small things and to insist on bigger things. What I said to you today about refugees is the most problematic for the Palestinians. It's a huge stuff. It relates also to the Jewish democratic state, and I will relate to it later. But why not to be generous or to be open on things that serve your interest as well? So this is why I believe that we need to focus, as I said, the same GPS, what we need to do, what serves our interest, and not to take all this way, doing all this calculation. And basically, it's political calculations. It's not about the big issues. It's how it would be accepted in the Israeli public opinion. How this is to be, as a woman in politics, well, frankly, I joined politics, the women empowerment was not part of my agenda. For many years, I was not connected to this. I felt that what I need to do is in this conflict matter. But later, when I joined politics, I discovered that, we need to fight together for equal rights. But my personal, what I faced personally, for the first time, I discovered that things that are obvious for me are not obvious for others. I mean, before that, I was a lawyer, okay? I got pregnant, and I saw my clients, like in cartoons, they are thinking, oh, she's now pregnant, what would happen? And it was my own law firm, and I said, okay, I have nobody to blame. And then, so I took my son, who is 26 now, with a carry coat to my office, and I worked. And all this guilty conscience that I had to my children because I was not at home, okay, I have nobody to blame, it's me, it's nobody else. But then I discovered that for me it was the obvious to be the general manager of the government campus authority, to be a minister, to be a member in the Israeli cabinet, to be a foreign minister, to make decisions on war and peace. And then at first I heard this from women saying, okay, good for you, it's good for us. And I said, why? And they said, because if you are strong, it gives us power to do something. When you are doing something, it gives us strength, and I truly don't care whether it gives them strength to demand equal salary or equal rights, or to say to their spouse or husband, don't beat me, or something like this. Altogether, I discovered that what I do, which I do personally because I believe that I can do it and I want to do it, helps others. And then I discovered that if we would not fight for this together, nobody would do it for us as a group. And then, of course, there was the question of 3 a.m. phone call to the Prime Minister's office. Now, it's okay that a woman would answer the phone and say, hello, just a moment, I'm giving you the Prime Minister. And Israel is a place in which you have veteran generals coming from the army to politics. And this is the old guys, and women are not part of it. But what I discovered in the cabinet is that I can make better decisions on Israel's security. That Israel's security is not just from a military perspective. I mean, the second war in Lebanon, when the army was focused on military operation, the second day I started to work with the US on Security Council resolution, how to finish this war. How can we have an international decision against Hezbollah in an understanding that when facing terror, it's not like we used to have, unfortunately, war between states. Against terrorist organization, always somebody can come out of the bunker, say, I won, and this would be the impression. So how can we recruit the world to have decisions, Security Council decisions against terror, against Hezbollah? And security is not just military. I mean, we have great generals. They are coming to the cabinet with their uniforms to share with us their ideas. And we are entitled to ask them questions. And to think just not about the military option, but also about the legitimacy to act, about how to end this. So I believe that we have a broader angle, and this is even better when it comes to Israel's security. And what I discovered in 2009 when I ran for office is that I was surprised, by the way, but I got support from women. And they supported me for being a woman, and I was really wrapped by love and support, and I felt that this is empowering all of us. I mean, I empower them, they empower me, and it was really great. And since that day, I discovered the sisterhood stuff. I am fully supportive of this, and now I'm preaching And my first visit to the state, my first day in this visit to the state was I had a meeting with Ban Ki-moon, and I said publicly, and I also part of the campaign to have the first time a woman as the Secretary General of the United Nations. Anyway, what does it mean to be a Jewish democratic state? It's a great question, and we need to solve this also first in Israel, but also to have an open dialogue with the world Jewry. I mean, everybody says Jewish democratic. What does it mean? We know what democracy is, but this is the only Jewish state in the world. I believe that Judaism, it's not just a matter of religion, it's also a matter of being one people. And therefore we say Jewish state, but it's not a religious state. It's the nation state of the Jewish people. This is the place in which the Jewish people, in accordance to their right for self-determination in a state of their own, created a state. It's also in accordance to United Nations Resolution 181 from 1947. And therefore, it's not religious. And I believe that the monopoly of the Jewishness of the state shouldn't be given to the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel. But this should be part of my understanding about being one people, to be open also to different streams in Judaism. And it means that the minorities in Israel, those who are non-Jews, are equal rights citizens, because this is our values, Jewish values and democratic values. And this is why I'm willing to give up part of the land, because there's a need for a Jewish majority to keep this the identity of this state. It means that the law of returns gives priority to Jews to come to Israel, but since they are there, everybody is equal right. Respecting minorities is part of the values that I believe are my Jewish values as democratic values. And therefore, on a daily life, there is no difference. As individuals, there is no difference. It shouldn't be any different between any Jew or Muslim or Christian in Israel. But this is the state in which just one people has the right for a safe determination as a people. When hopefully when the Palestinian state would be created, this is the place in which the Palestinians would have their own nation state. But this is, in few words, what I believe about Israel as a Jewish democratic state. And when I speak about center-left or about future election, I believe that what we represent in a way is the hyphen between Jewish democratic state. We need both. We don't want Israel to be more Jewish and less democratic. When we are speaking about peace and security, we don't want to choose between peace or security. We need both. And when we speak also about social and economic issues, I believe that we need to be balanced also on these issues. I have some problems maybe with Labour Party, but basically this is what I believe the Zionist Union represent. I know that according to the polls, the people are going to the right. But you ask somebody at the phone, between 1 to 5, 1 is left, 5 is right, where do you put yourself? Usually they would say that they are right-wing. Because it's cool to be right-wing in Israel. It's a tough neighborhood, as I said. We need to be strong. This is, the new Israeli. This is the way Israel was created. We need to be strong. Then the world is against us, so we need to be against the world, all this stuff. But then if the next question, okay, if an Israeli prime minister would put on the table a plan or an agreement with the Palestinians saying that this is 67 line and take Clinton parameters as an example, they would support it. So it's not about the way people define themselves, but it is basically what they agree for. But unfortunately, as I said about the world and about extremism, we have also this in Israel. And we need to fight against it. Now, I don't believe in being or speaking in a rightish manner in order to get support. I believe that we need to show to the Israelis that we have a completely different vision, that we know how to give security to Israel, not less, but even better from the current government, that we believe in a Jewish democratic state and not just in a Jewish state like some of my friends in the current Israeli government, that we believe in giving equal rights, and it's not being left-wing or trying to appease the Palestinians. We are thinking about Israel and the way to keep Israel as a Jewish state. We need to share our story, our belief, our vision, our narrative, and to convince that this is the right way to the state of Israel. Because otherwise, to imitate those that are in the government now, if you have imitation or the genuine stuff, the public would support the genuine stuff. But I'm here and I joined politics because I believe in something. And it was almost there. I mean, the last election, it was very close. Until the last day in which Netanyahu said, these Arabs. And it's 50-50 in the end. It's really 50-50 now. Demography is working against that, but it's 50-50 now. And we should work. And as I don't want to relate to any commercial company, but we are second, so we need to work harder. Okay, thank you.